There's one particular sutta where I think he floats up in the air and expels water from the top half of his body and fire from the bottom half or something like that. So you get these stories or accounts in Buddhism of what we would think of as supernatural, superhuman qualities. Great, so welcome to Dharma Night. My name's Virinaga and I'm going to continue talking about this series on the Buddha jewel, or understanding the Buddha. And we've been talking about understanding how we can get to know the Buddha, particularly through historical accounts and records of the Buddha. But I'm going to talk a little bit about the legend, if you like, the legend of the Buddha. And I'm here with my friend Dana, and we're going to be talking a bit about that. But I'm just going to give you a little kind of overview, really, a bit about the legend, first of all. And Buddhism it's got a long history. There's a lot written about Buddhism. You've got the original texts, the Pali Canon, which are themselves basically written down a couple of hundred years after what was an oral tradition of Buddhism, of teachings being passed down. And you've got then all the other kind of profusion of texts and teachings that have evolved from that 2,500 years of teachings, the Mahayana, the Vajrayana, Chan Buddhism in China, Zen Buddhism in Japan, the Abhidharma, Buddhist psychology. So much has been written about Buddhist teachings, and particularly about the Buddha. It's not surprising that some of the kind of stuff that's been written has a sense of kind of legend or myth about it. But we must be careful. Talking about legend doesn't mean it's necessarily fictitious. It might just mean that it needs to be considered in a broader context. But anyway, what I'm going to do is present to you some examples of different, if you like, forms of legends of the Buddha, and then I'm just going to talk a little bit about why that is useful to us to engage with those teachings. Certainly historically speaking, certainly in sort of the Western academic study of Buddhism, anything that sort of felt a bit sort of smacked of legend has often been just cast out as not true or not historical. I kind of sense that somehow by excluding all of the mythic stuff or the legendary stuff, we can somehow get a true sense of the Buddha. But what I want to do is hopefully point out that that isn't entirely true. So sort of stuff in a way that you might be considered legend, which you quite readily find in a lot of Buddhist teachings, is where you have accounts of the Buddha that are elaborated on or built upon in certain different ways. And one very common one is a kind of exaggeration. You get a lot of exaggeration, particularly in what you'd call Mahayana Buddhism. So this particular school of Buddhism really built up the story of the Buddha in almost like a sort of fantastical or a very grand way. And I think Buddhism is an Indian tradition, and I think certainly in cultural India around this time, there was definitely a sense of wanting to emphasize the importance of teachings by making something very grand. So it's not unusual in Buddhist texts, particularly Mahayana texts, to find episodes where the Buddha was joined by monks, and not only is there a few hundred monks or a few thousand monks, but there's hundreds of thousands of monks, or millions of monks, or whatever, all sorts of things. So it's very, very common in Buddhism to find this sense of kind of exaggeration. And what's also quite common in Buddhist texts is obviously a lot has been written about the Buddha. And if you look at early texts, in a way, they tend to be a bit more kind of historically accurate or a bit more realistic. And gradually as they go on, they can get a bit more exaggerated, or quite often what you'll find is that stuff that you can, in the early texts, may have been associated with one of the Buddha's disciples. Quite often you'll find that as the kind of myth has evolved over the hundreds of thousands of years, more and more has been attributed to the Buddha. So you get this sense of kind of exaggeration or misattribution to the Buddha, in a certain way making the Buddha seem very grand. In a certain way, he is a very impressive man, or certainly even the historical accounts make him very impressive. But you have this sense of grandeur entering into the legend. The other interesting area is one where you quite often you get accounts of the Buddha or his disciples indeed being recorded as kind of displaying supernatural or superhuman abilities, so like clairvoyance or levitation, or there's one particular sutta where I think he floats up in the air and expels water from the top half of his body and fire from the bottom half or something like that. So you get these stories or accounts in Buddhism of what we would think of as supernatural, superhuman qualities associated with the Buddha. Now the tendency in our sort of materialist or scientific society is just to disregard that as kind of superstition or whatever, myth, storytelling, something of those accounts. But I want to just make an argument for saying, well, I mean, probably there is probably some sort of exaggeration there as well, but I want to make a sort of argument for not completely ruling out things of that nature. So there's quite a lot we still don't know about the mind. In fact, a very great deal we don't know about the mind. And certainly even in modern Buddhist practitioners, that can be subject to scientific study, there's all sorts of very interesting accounts of things that they can do with their mind. So in Tibetan Buddhism, there's a particular practice called the Tummo, which is where these very experienced meditation practitioners can have very fine-grained control over their body temperature. And there's these great videos you can watch of them sort of heating towels and just like the steam coming off their body as they make their body warm. And of course, this they've got this lineage of training, so they can basically survive in very cold climates with hardly any clothes on or anything, so they can meditate in mountain caves without any shelter and so on. I don't know much about Wim Hof, but apparently I've heard he's also a Tummo practitioner, and the Wim Hof method is about him accessing his bodily temperature. Apparently he climbed Everest wearing no kind of warm clothes using this method. So anyway, don't know if that's true or not, but I just want to sort of make a case that the mind is capable of amazing things, and we don't know completely what it's capable of. So you've got this sense of supernatural or abilities in a way. What I find quite interesting in Buddhism is they're not essential for Buddhist practice. They're sort of regarded as a side effect of deep meditation or deep practice. Almost like they're definitely not the point of, even in the text, they're not the point of meditation. They don't help us towards enlightenment. They're just there as things that happen, interesting things that happen. And I think if you talk to anybody that's had a really serious meditation practice over decades, well, they quite often report some quite interesting things happening to them and in their minds. So anyway, an open-mindedness towards that I think is interesting. So the legend of the Buddha certainly has many of these accounts, which I find interesting. And then the third kind of main area that I just want to touch on is kind of events that from the Buddha's life that sound historical, that are a little bit fantastical or legend, but probably more represent spiritual experiences. So you've got quite a lot around the story of the Buddha's enlightenment, him meeting Mara, or him meditating under a tree, under the Bodhi tree for 7 weeks and encountering an earth goddess, and subsequently him being sheltered from a storm by a giant snake representing the Naga king or the Naga prince. So all of these accounts, they're presented as historical in a way, but if you read a close reading of them, they kind of they appear more to represent a kind of spiritual experience or a psychological experience that was happening to the Buddha. And one familiar account that you may know of is called the Four Sights. And this is where the Buddha supposedly leaves his palace where he's lived a life of luxury, and he encounters an old man, a sick man, a corpse, and finally a monk. And it's said that he encounters these for the first time. But it's a bit, in a way, that's a bit hard to believe. That someone in India, even a kind of prince in a way, or a wealthy son of a king or a prince, could never have encountered before an old man or a dead man or a sick man or whatever. What that story is probably getting at is more that he's encountered them as if for the first time. He's seen for the first time what old age really means, what sickness really means, if you see what I mean. So the story is more representative probably of a kind of understanding or an experience. So you get a lot of this in the text. You get a lot of senses of exaggerated stories. You get some accounts of sort of superhuman abilities or supernatural experiences, and also accounts that are probably better explained as spiritual experiences. So rather than disregarding them in our practice, there's a lot to be, in a way, trying to find our way through Buddhist teachings can be quite confusing at times. So rather than discount all of this stuff as kind of fictitious or fake, I think we really do need to engage with it. We really do need to engage with that, as well as the legend of the Buddha, as well as the historical accounts, if you like, because they represent important aspects of Buddhist practice. They're hints or clues towards things which maybe can't be explained in an entirely rational way. And because Buddhism has evolved out of a historical tradition, you can really imagine that the best way to communicate the Dharma, to communicate these truths or these signposts, is not to necessarily sketch them out in rational terms, but by telling stories. That certainly, I'm sure ancient India would have had a very rich culture of storytelling, particularly amongst rural communities and so on. So there's a lot there. So we want to approach these legendary accounts with not a kind of dismissiveness or a cynicism, but rather an openness and an intelligence as well. What do they really mean? What are they trying to get at? What's underneath the kind of surface layers of these stories? What is the legend trying to communicate with us? Because ultimately, if we're interested in enlightenment, or at the very least we're interested in developing our wisdom or insight, we have to accept that there's lots of things we don't know about, and all of these things are clues or signs to things which can lead us to deeper understandings. So next time you're reading a fantastical account of the Buddha's life, or something that's happened to him, or a giant serpent prince coming out of the forest to shelter the Buddha in a rainstorm, just ask yourself, well, what might this be telling me about the enlightenment experience? What's this pointing to? What's this a sign towards? And if you can engage with it as a story without too much literalism and cynicism, well, there's great treasures to be found. Hello, Amnadana. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you very much for that talk.
That's all right. So, what should we talk about? So, what do you think about the legend of the Buddha?
I think that I remember when I first started reading about Buddhism, how I sort of automatically put things to the side. I was looking for the real stuff, and I was putting away the other stuff. And to some extent, I still do that. But I really like what you said about Buddhism not relying on, if you like, the miracles of the Buddha. In fact, these are things which are side effects, as you say, and that's a sense I've always got that it doesn't matter if I don't really buy into a particular fantastic event. Although I do buy into a lot more, now, because of as you're saying, some of them have a lot of spiritual, psychological messages they're trying to relay. And I find that I'm finding it more and more palatable the more I read and the more I study. That's just generally over my whole sort of introduction to Buddhism.
Seems to be quite a common way in. I think people seem to. I mean, I certainly was like this as well. It's like, I take the bits I'm comfortable with and a bit provisional about the other stuff. But it seems to be a bit of a trajectory as people have deeper meditation experiences and perhaps experience a bit of it for themselves. A bit more going on than initially what there seems to be in a way. There seems to be a bit of an opening up to these other things. You start thinking, okay, well maybe there is a bit more in that, or. I mean, a common one quite often is, people talking about past lives or rebirths or so on. There's quite a bit in Buddhist texts about the Buddha's past lives and so on. And it's like, oh, okay, when confronted with that initially, you've got to think, okay, what do I think about that? How open am I to this?
Well, I remember I remember not believing in the ideas of rebirth. I mean, I was a nihilist, down to the core. Yeah, I mean, that's the way I explained things to myself. And at some point, I don't know when it happened, but I completely flipped, and I find it a very, very comforting concept, actually. In that, comforting in that it sort of rings more true to me, and actually, it opens up my view of of the sort of normal world. In fact, it allows me to accept more things and to allow in more possibilities, and it makes me realise how constrained I am actually with my sort of the way I've been brought up to look at things, and in fact they don't all have to be looked at quite so tightly, and that things are a bit looser and a bit more mysterious and wonderful.
Well, yeah, that's it. I often think about that. It's that nihilist position is a bit it's a bit dry, isn't it, somehow? And there's not much going on. Like I sort of want to live in a world of magic and mystery and interest, and like if that means I need to just open up a little bit and just see, obviously not disregard my own experience, but just be a bit more open to things. There's much more opportunity there, much more richness. It's very sort of interesting. I just remember meeting, Buddhist practitioners who I really regarded. I had a lot of respect for, in a way, and respect for their practice and just their openness to, all sorts of interesting kind of experiences and so on. I was just like, I've got to take this seriously. Here's people I really respect.
Well, it's so much more exciting. It's just so much more. It's not sort of fantasy. It's actually allowing in more of your experience. And in fact, I think a lot of the time, we cut off a lot of our experience. I think in the chapter, Sangha was talking about treading the middle way between credulity and skepticism. And that's got an interesting sort of, and so when I say put things on the back burner, I think that's what I was doing in a sense. I was just sort of finding a way that I could accept it, not that I was discounting it, not that I was saying that's complete rubbish and I would completely put it to ignore it. But for the moment, I can't really take it in. I can't say I buy into that. But I have had quite a few experiences where things I've read, which are fantastic, particularly things like Milarepa, where demons come to see him and things like this, and where I think it's fun, it's a bit OTT, but actually, then I find out that when you wake up in the middle of the night and you have these sorts of experiences of your world changes, and it's a way of in a sense it's like a demon, or it's like a different world or different. Presence that you sense, and why not express it as demons? Well, it's much better to do that than not express it at all.
That's right. Our inner we can have all these things in our inner experience, can't we? We can have things that do feel demonesque or like gods or goddesses or whatever, and like stuff does happen inside of us, doesn't it? And experientially, is there a better way of explaining them other than say, oh yeah, I had this engagement, or you can really see how those sorts of experiences made them into kind of texts and stories and teachings of Buddhism in a way. Very, very interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, we get into the whole very interesting area of what is our experience anyway. What is reality? I'm sure we've all had dreams that have felt realer than real life, but yet are completely fantastical, to use that term. So what is our experience? What is our reality? What is even real?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's like those dreams when you have a, we all every now and again, I think we all have a dream that sort of stands out and that we know there's something really important in it, and we have this sort of sense of that dream when we wake up, but then it melts away, doesn't it? Then even if we write it down, we read it, it's not the same. There's something that's gone from our experience, and we're trying to actually not discount those sorts of things. We're trying to accept them and move into a world where they exist. And I think that's a really exciting thing to do.
That's right. And then if we're trying to get to know the Buddha in a way, to just get to know the kind of historical figure, the kind of Indian man that wandered around for 40 years teaching whatever, teaching the Dharma, it just seems like we'd miss a whole depth. It'd just be like, to use the metaphor of the ocean, we'd just be floating around on the surface, wouldn't we? How could we get a sense of his depths without, in a way, thinking about these legends, in a way, thinking that, thinking of him on a different realm almost, which I know you'll be giving a talk about shortly.
Yes, let the cat out of the bag there, haven't you? Talking about on the surface of the ocean in terms of exaggeration, which I hope it is. I hope it's an exaggeration. You know the story about the turtle that finds its way to the surface of the ocean and puts its head through a little round ring.
This is in reference to being born a human.
No, well, actually, yeah, but it's and that in terms of the exaggerations you were talking about, that came to mind. Actually, sort of going back to the beginning, but. And that's one of the things where I think, oh goodness, I hope that's not true. I hope that is an exaggeration. And I think because there are lots of descriptions, aren't there, in the sutras about incredibly, actually periods of time which are just totally unimaginable. And maybe that's the point of them. They're trying to make you don't think about specific time periods. Just think about it as don't think about that at all. It's just a very long time away.
Yeah, you can sort of develop a way of reading, can't you? It's like, okay, there's a lot of people there. This is very important, or that's a really long time. You can just sort of paraphrase and just kind of, you're like, okay, what they're trying to do here is say that this is a really important meeting that the Buddha has with, whatever this disciple, because there's 10,000 gods present, so it must be an important meeting. Yeah. But yeah, I think it's sort of like, in a certain way, I think of it as, how if you were a script writer or something, and you were telling a story in a theatre, you would have all of these kind of ways of demonstrating the significance of a scene, wouldn't you? With the music, or maybe the lights dim, or something's highlighted. It's a way of just sort of emphasising, isn't it, certain things, and it's like. The question to ask oneself is, what are they trying to emphasise here, and why?
It's like it's trying to get away from our rational mind, isn't it? It's trying to engage more of us. And you're right. And we look at sort of fantastic films and things, and it doesn't matter that if it's totally, the superhero things, we watch those and we enjoy those and we accept those, don't we? And we don't say to ourselves, well, that's impossible, so I'm not going to watch this. I'm not going to look at it. But I think there's probably a little bit more behind the Buddha's message. Yeah,
but it's interesting. Even those things, they often have a moral story, don't they? They often do try to communicate something of a teaching. Even though they are like the Avengers or whatever. Or do you know what I mean? Yeah. Good. Oh, how are we doing? We're probably getting on, aren't we? So, thank you very much.
Thank you very
much.
That's
good. I look forward to the next part.
Next week.
yeah. Look forward to the next part. Yeah. Great. Thanks, Amladana.
Thank you.
Thanks. Great. So I hope you enjoyed that Dharma Night talk. So if you did enjoy it, if you're enjoying our videos, I just want to ask you or encourage you to think about making a donation to the Brixton Buddhist community. We're a UK charity that relies completely on your donations to run everything here. And if this was a meditation class, there'd be a donation bowl that you could just put in £10 at the end of the night to help support the activities. But as you're watching this online, I just want to ask you to think about making an online donation. If you've watched 4 or 5 videos this month, maybe you might want to think about giving £10. So there's a link in the description below where you can go to our website and make a donation. And if you want to keep giving and you don't want to worry about making that donation every month, well, you could just set up a monthly standing order. That would be really, really helpful. I want to suggest something of the region of maybe £10 or £20 a month if you're able to do that. And that would be really, really helpful and help us keep producing videos like this one. Thanks for listening. Take care of yourself.